Bret the Hitman Hart. There's really so much to say about him in regards to his WrestleMania legacy. He's a guy that, started his time at WrestleMania as a relative unknown and then slowly moved his way up the ranks to eventually become one of the greatest of all time in WWF, WWE history. He's also a guy that worked at all levels, tag team, intercontinental, main event. So many of his matches at WrestleMania are just some of my personal favorite matches that he ever had. And to me, he was the guy that really, sort of like what Sting was for WCW in those early 90s years when things were down. To me, he was kind of the guy that, carried the flag and tried to carry the show as best he could. It wasn't just him. You obviously had Shawn there, you had Taker there, and to a lesser extent, Razor Ramon was also one of those guys. But to me, Bret Hart was just he was the poster boy of the company, and through good times and bad, he was Mr. Reliable a lot of the times, and he really, carried Mania through those down years, especially after Hogan left. And I think, to me, was his major contribution. He was the guy that tried to help keep the ship right, when things were really, really dark. And he had some major contributions. He also had the record for the most consecutive WrestleMania appearances, 12 in a row, from 12 to 13. Undertaker this year is going to break that record. And by consecutive WrestleManias, I'm referring strictly to having matches at 12 consecutive WrestleManias. Taker's going to break that this year, but Bret Hart had that record for a long time, which really shows the kind of longevity that he had during the prime of his career in the WWF. But let's jump right into his WrestleMania history. He started at WrestleMania 2 as part of the Hart Foundation. And it's actually a pretty big one. It's actually, a pretty significant start for him. He was in the WWF versus NFL Battle Royal, which was one of the major attractions of WrestleMania 2. Obviously, he wasn't the main focus. Guys like Andre, guys like Bruno Sammartino, who had his only WrestleMania match, he was part of that. William the Refrigerator Perry, coming right off of the big Super Bowl win with the Chicago Bears. He was in this, in Chicago, by the way. So, obviously, that was a huge, attraction to have him as part of that. But Bret Hart was in that match, and he was actually the last one eliminated, which was, pretty cool to showcase them in that way. It came down to the Harts and Andre the Giant. Obviously, Andre the Giant would get the win, but Bret being the last one eliminated showed that they had something in that team, and they did want to showcase them in at least a fairly significant way. Now, according to Bret in his book, the original plan was for them to do Bret Hart versus Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 2, and they actually had that match at a Boston live event that's featured on the first Bret Hart DVD, which I have. And it was a really good match, and would have been a really good match to have at WrestleMania. But it didn't happen, but I don't think Bret got shafted by any means. He did get showcased in a pretty big match, even though he was sharing the spotlight with 19 other guys. It was still a pretty big step for him, I felt. So for him to be a part of that major attraction, I thought was pretty good for giving him some attention. And then the next year, he was, him and the Anvil, the Hart Foundation, they were the tag team champions, though they did not defend the tag team titles at WrestleMania 3, which back then was unheard of. Nowadays, that's an expected occurrence. It's like tag team titles at WrestleMania, who wants that? But yeah, it was Bret Hart, Jim the Anvil Neidhart, and evil referee turned wrestler, Dangerous Danny Davis, taking on the British Bulldogs and Tito Santana. Now, the Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation are, the matches that they had together are often celebrated as some of the best matches the WWF had to offer in the 80s. And that is correct. Some of their matches were absolutely amazing and just tag team excellence at its finest. And the six-man tag at WrestleMania was actually pretty entertaining. I thought it showed off the athleticism of the Harts and the Bulldogs and the type of matches they were able to have together. And the added element of Danny Davis, who helped them win the tag titles through his crooked officiating, provided a nice bit of entertainment where the Bulldogs could get their hands on him and throw him around and, basically make him suffer for what he did. But ultimately, the Hart Foundations and Danny Davis, they would win that match. and it would be Bret Hart's first WrestleMania victory, even though Danny Davis was the one who got the pin. It was still a pretty entertaining, nice, athletic match to have at WrestleMania, and a good showcase for the tag team champions, even though the titles weren't on the line. The next year, Bret Hart found himself in another battle royal. Jim Neidhart was part of that as well. This one was a lot less significant than their other ones. Or it was a lot less significant than the NFL Battle Royal at 2, for sure. But Bret Hart was once again the last one eliminated, as him and Bad News Brown struck up an alliance to last all the way to the end, and it looked like that they were going to take a tie. And Bad News Brown double-crossed Bret, threw him out of the ring, and won the match, which resulted in Bret Hart getting pissed off and chasing Bad News Brown away, and then taking the trophy that the winner would have received and smashing it to bits. And while this isn't any kind of a significant WrestleMania moment or match or anything of that nature, and as far as I know, nothing really came of a Bret Hart versus Bad News Brown feud, it was one of the first instances where they were like, hey, this Bret Hart guy, we want to showcase him because he's really good, and we're going to showcase him as a singles guy for a while. And shortly after this, the Hart Foundation would turn babyface and ultimately become one of the most popular teams in the company. So while this wasn't a great moment or match by any means, it was still a showcase that the WWF had a lot of faith in Bret, that they were willing to showcase him as a single star, even though he was still in the tag team, and maybe they had something for him down the line, which obviously they did. The next year was another kind of uneventful one for the Harts. It wasn't a bad match. It was the Hart Foundation versus Honky Tonk Man and Greg Valentine. Now, they were doing an angle where their manager, Jimmy Hart, had sold out their contracts and given it to the fabulous Rougeau brothers. And this was just Bret Hart working, or the Hart Foundation working against two of Jimmy's guys, which were Honky Tonk and Greg Valentine. And arguably, I mean, those were the two biggest guys in Jimmy Hart's group of, their stable, so that's probably what they were thinking there. But I would have preferred it if they worked with the Rougeau brothers, since the Rougeaus were the ones that took their contract with Jimmy, and I think that would have been a better match to have. This one, it was just a solid, ordinary type of match, and the Harts got the win, getting their revenge against Jimmy Hart, and it paid off in that aspect, but I wish they had actually just had them work with the Rougeaus, because I think that would have been a much better match, but that's just me. The Hart Foundation got another win at WrestleMania 6, this one coming very quickly. They beat the Bolsheviks in 18 seconds. And it seemed a little strange to me. It's like, wow, Bret Hart's a Canadian, and they were having the first international WrestleMania in Toronto, Canada, and they have the match in 18 seconds. I mean, yeah, the Harts won, and it got a big pop and everything, but I just was like, really? 18 seconds? That's all they got? But there was method to their madness, because the Hart Foundation challenged the winners of the tag team title match of that show, which was Demolition versus the Colossal Connection. And in WWF's mind, they were thinking, hey, let's make the Hart Foundation look like a really legit, credible tag team title contender, and what better way to do that than just, have them win a quick match. I mean, they looked dominant coming out of that match, if nothing else, and they looked like they belonged as number one contenders to the tag team titles. So ultimately, they would get their title match at SummerSlam later that year against Demolition, which personally to me is one of my all-time favorite tag team matches of all time. I love that match. If you haven't seen that night, it's SummerSlam 1990, 2 out of 3 falls, Demolition versus the Hart Foundation. I love that match. It is one of my favorite all-time tag team matches. It's pretty spectacular. I love it. But the next year, WrestleMania 7, the Harts would be featured for the final time at WrestleMania. It was the last time they ever teamed up on pay-per-view. I mean, yeah, there was the 10-man tag at Canadian Stampede, but this was the last time you actually got Bret and the Anvil together as a tag team on pay-per-view. And I'll be honest, I think it's their best outing at WrestleMania. It's actually a pretty damn good match. It's the Hart Foundation defending the tag titles against the Nasty Boys. Great tag team match. I really, really like this match. And it was a nice send-off for the Harts. Ultimately, they would lose. Nasty Boys would get the tag titles. And, but it was a nice send-off for the Harts as a tag team. They would break up soon after this, and Bret Hart would go singles. And as a final pay-per-view outing for the Harts, I think it was a great way to go out, because it was really a very, very good tag team match. And their personal best as a team at WrestleMania. So it worked out great in that sense. But shortly after that, Bret would find himself in the Intercontinental title ranks, would win the title in one of the greatest matches of all time at SummerSlam 91. would lose the title early 1992 under mysterious circumstances that I don't really want to get into right now because it would just take too long to explain. But he would ultimately get another shot for the Intercontinental title against Rowdy Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 8. And I already talked about this in the Piper video. I think that this is one of the finest Intercontinental title matches I've ever seen. I love this match to death. It's certainly one of the best at WrestleMania history. Maybe not up to par with Savage and Steamboat or the ladder match at 10 between Shawn and Razor, but it's a damn good one in its own right. And it's violent, it's exciting. Piper turning heel really put the love on Bret Hart. I think once Piper sort of turned heel in that match, it really, got the fans behind Bret Hart. And I think it was such a huge moment for him and really put him on the path to ultimately becoming World Heavyweight Champion. This was a big star-making match for Bret, and definitely his first true WrestleMania classic where he got to shine as a singles guy. And it really got the ball rolling on Bret Hart's career, and ultimately he would become the man for the WWF within the next year. And it was sort of like what the Savage Steamboat match was for Savage. It's no surprise that Bret Hart was main eventing WrestleMania the very next year. He was actually the World Heavyweight Champion going in. He was defending the gold against an up-and-comer, a monster sumo champion named Yokozuna. And to their credit, they did a really good job of building up Yoko as a legit monster threat to the championship. Personally, I would have preferred it if they'd done Bret versus Perfect or Bret versus Savage as their main event and actually had Bret go over. But, they built Yoko up as a legit threat to Bret, and that worked out quite well. And I thought Bret did a really good job working around Yoko's size and making the most exciting match possible out of it. Now, what followed was a big load of bullshit as Yoko won the title, and then they did the whole thing where Hogan came out and won the belt in 30 seconds, and Bret kind of got pushed to the wayside, and it really was a slap in the face of Bret Hart, the guy who pretty much carried the company for the last 6 months in Hogan's absence. And, it wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't... it should have resulted in Bret versus Hogan down the road. That didn't happen, and it kind of left Bret without a direction. Of course, while Yoko was tied up in the world title scene and Hogan got his last run with the belt, and ultimately Lex Luger would get his push to the main event scene, Bret was left with other things, like his King of the Ring run, which was, in my opinion, the best King of the Ring tournament they ever did. And ultimately his feud with Jerry Lawler and his storyline with his brother Owen, where Owen got jealous of Bret's success, and they did that whole thing. So while he got pushed out of the main event scene, Bret got a lot of substantial stuff in the meantime. And ultimately, by the time all that stuff was done, the fans had pretty much picked Bret Hart over Luger. And that's pretty much how it came to be at WrestleMania 10, where... Luger and Bret were co-winners of the Royal Rumble that year, and this was the second year where the Royal Rumble winner would get the shot at the World Heavyweight Champion. So it was decided that each guy would wrestle twice. Luger would get the title shot first against Yoko, and then Bret would face his brother Owen to settle their grudge, and then Bret would face the winner of the Luger-Yoko match in the main event, and that's how it was decided. And Bret Hart basically had WrestleMania 10 built around him, and sort of like how WrestleMania 4 was built around Savage. And that's a great show of faith when they give you that much promotion for a WrestleMania. Yeah, the ladder match happened as well, and that Bret wasn't the only star at WrestleMania 10, but WrestleMania 10 in a lot of ways is his event. That was his night, and he got to open the show and he got to close the show. And he opened the show with his match against Owen, which, in my opinion, not only the greatest WrestleMania opener of all time, it's one of the best matches I've ever seen. I just love the match. I love the storyline going into it. I love Owen's character and the reasoning for his heel turn. I love this technical wrestling match that they were able to put together. I think it's an outstanding match. Absolutely perfect, outstanding match with a shocking ending as Owen got the win, which was a huge star-making win for Owen. And really one of the best showcases for Bret's ability as a single star. And just a really good job all around by both guys. And then, of course, Bret got his main event against Yokozuna, which was a wonderful bookend, or a nice follow-up to what had happened the previous year, where Bret got screwed out of the title, and now he was getting his shot at redemption, which is a theme at WrestleMania this year, of course. He got a shot at redemption against Yoko in the main event. And it was a dramatic match, because it was like, okay, we want Yoko to lose the title, we want Bret to win, and it looked like that might not happen. And they did a really good job in this match as well. And ultimately, Bret got the win, and it was one of the great WrestleMania celebrations, I think, where all the baby faces came out, and the announcers came out, and everybody came in to give Bret the hero's welcome. And then you had Owens standing on the, at the entranceway, just in disbelief, looking, what about me? What about me? And of course, I mean, that set up something for down the road where Bret and Owen would have their rematches and ultimately have that fantastic cage match at SummerSlam following a King of the Ring tournament victory from Owen Hart. So, I mean, they definitely had a plan in place for something good, and they did a fantastic job. As much as Bret got screwed at WrestleMania 9, they more than made up for it at Mania 10 in huge ways. And, WrestleMania 10 was his night in the sun. He had one of the greatest matches of his career, and then he went out there in the main event and had, in my opinion, the best and most satisfying title win of his career. So, WrestleMania 10, all about the Hitman. What else is there to say? WrestleMania 11 was not as glamorous. He was having a feud with Bob Backlund, and they had this match at Survivor Series 1994 where Bret dropped the title to Bob Backlund, and it was a fantastic storyline with Bob playing this perfect psycho heel character. And even though Bob had dropped the title long before Mania 11, there was still room to do something there and room to do a rematch where Bret could, get his revenge on Bob Backlund for stealing the title from him. And they were going to have an I Quit match. Now, you're thinking, okay, these two technical wizards with, a lot of heat and a lot of success from their previous match, you would think that they could go out there and have an awesome match. You'd think so. No, it was actually kind of fucking awful. It was a terrible match. I think Bret Hart even said in his book it was the worst pay-per-view match of his career. Keep in mind that book was released before WrestleMania 26, which, oh man, I'm going to get into that one, no doubt. But, this match, it was boring. It was kind of farcical with, Roddy Piper as the special guest referee just constantly screaming into the mic every 5 seconds. Bob Backlund never really said I quit, so the ending was really awkward. It was just a really, really bad match, and not what you would have expected out of those two, especially at WrestleMania. It was a disaster. But then again, this whole WrestleMania was a disaster, so what do you want? Then we move on to WrestleMania 12, which was another Bret Hart main evented show. And, we're really into the down period at this point. I mean, 11 was an ultimate low for the company, and then by 12, they had almost nothing. I mean, the pageantry at WrestleMania was almost gone. The magic was gone. It was not a good time for the company. So what they did, in a brilliant move on their part, they said, okay, we have these two guys. We got Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. What we're going to do is we're going to have these two outstanding talents work an hour-long match, and that's going to be half the show. And that's going to be the major thing we sell. We can't really sell anything that special, so we're just going to sell wrestling. We're going to sell the best possible wrestling match. And it succeeded. I think the Iron Man match is a very good main event. And just a wonderful showcase for both men's abilities. I mean, it's often remembered as a greater success for Shawn, obviously, since it was the first time he ever won the world title, and it deserves to be one of his crowning achievements. But I think it's a crowning achievement for Bret, too, because, A, it takes two to tango, and B, I mean, you put those two guys together, you know that they can go an hour. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, when I first heard it, I was like, okay, Bret and Shawn going an hour, they can do that. And I expected a wonderful athletic contest, and sure enough, that's exactly what I got. With, and they really, especially by the end of that match, it seemed like Bret was just this unbeatable wrestler, and it was the perfect obstacle for Shawn to overcome, because especially in the closing minutes of that match, it looked like Bret was unbeatable, and Shawn might not live that boyhood dream. It might not happen. And, it was so perfect to put him up against Brett. It was really just a wonderful athletic contest that they put together. And the ending was fantastic, where Brett locked in the sharpshooter and Michaels did not submit, so they went to sudden death overtime. And Michaels hit the super kick and won, but it was just a wonderfully put together main event and one of Mania's finest, in my opinion. It's a great one, and even though Brett came out on the losing end, I think it is a crowning achievement for him as well, because not many guys can put together a match like that. And with Brett, there was no doubt. And with Shawn, there was no doubt. It was just the perfect pairing to do that type of match with, and the perfect time to do that type of match, because they really didn't have anything else to sell besides great wrestling out of those two. And they were the two guys that carried the company through the down years, and they deserve to be highlighted in that way. And then we come to what many thought would be Bret Hart's final WrestleMania, as he took on Stone Cold Steve Austin in a submission match, which is one of the most celebrated matches in WrestleMania history, and it absolutely deserves to be. It is outstanding from every angle. It was this wonderful dichotomy that they had established, where Bret was sort of a tweener getting ready to turn heel, where he was complaining about the fans turning on him and rooting for Steve Austin, and the constant title shots that he got screwed out of, and not being able to main event WrestleMania that year, getting screwed out of Mania last year. I mean, it was like Bret was really turning to the dark side, and on the other side, Steve Austin had become a tweener, where he was this nasty heel that was starting to get cheered, and the support for Steve Austin was growing by the day. So everything kind of came to a head at WrestleMania 13, and it was this very unique reaction to both guys, where the fans kept going back and forth on who they were rooting for, and it was really a clash of cultures almost, where it's like, okay, the good guy WWF days versus the rising Attitude Era. And it was this wonderful setup that they had that really resulted in this very exciting atmosphere. And the match that these two had together was nothing short of fantastic. It was one of Mania's absolute finest matches. Maybe the best match for Bret Hart at WrestleMania. Certainly my favorite Stone Cold Steve Austin WrestleMania match. And as much as that Piper-Bret match was a star-making match for Bret, this match was a huge star-making match for Austin, as Bret really went out of his way to make Austin look like $1 million. And even though Austin didn't win, it took Bret Hart to really get that kind of a performance out of Steve Austin, and to really put him over the top and get Austin to that point where he would be universally cheered. By the end of this match, there was no gray area. There was no conflict. Bret was the heel and Austin was the babyface. And whether you liked Austin or not coming into this match, most people respected him after this match. And a lot of that had to do with Bret's work in this match. And this match has been celebrated as the perfect way to do a double turn. And that's absolutely right. I mean, they did that perfectly here. It's an absolutely outstanding WrestleMania match, and one of Bret's absolute masterpieces. It's and one of the great masterpieces in WrestleMania's history. And in my opinion, it's the only goddamn reason to even pay attention to WrestleMania 3, because that show was an utter disaster other than this match. I mean, this is literally a one-match show, because the rest of it is at best forgettable and at worst absolutely horrendous. It is a lifeless WrestleMania, and in many ways was the ultimate low point of the company. But that match was the shining star, and it got the ball rolling on Austin's career, which would obviously pay dividends down the road. But for Bret, it was the start of his major heel run, which would carry out throughout '97. His final title run, which would come at SummerSlam, where he would beat Taker for the title. And ultimately, it would set up the Montreal Screwjob. And after that happened, I think a lot of us thought, okay, we're never going to see Bret Hart again in the WWE, WWF at the time. It's never going to happen again, and 13 was Bret Hart's last hurrah at WrestleMania, and we're never going to see him again. And even years later, 9 years later to be exact, 2006, Bret Hart was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, which that was something that I never thought would happen. But his relationship with the WWE and with Vince and with Shawn Michaels was still so tense that he didn't even appear at WrestleMania with the Hall of Fame class. So while he appeared at the event the night before, he didn't appear at WrestleMania itself, which, he's the only Hall of Famer. Since they started doing the Hall of Fame segments at WrestleMania, he's the only one to ever do that. So you're thinking, okay, even like his, because a lot of the WrestleMania greats have gotten that Hall of Fame induction as kind of a a huge testament to their careers at WrestleMania. Austin got it, Edge got it, Hogan got it, but Bret didn't even appear at WrestleMania, so Bret didn't even get to do that. Get his, one of his last WrestleMania appearances to be the Hall of Fame, honoring portion of the show. But then Bret Hart came back in 2010 and did the long-awaited program with Vince McMahon where he would finally get revenge on Vince for the Montreal Screwjob. And personally, I felt like this match was a good idea to have. I thought it was a nice thing to do for the fans who had followed the story for 13 years. And I thought, okay, they'll keep the match short and it'll get a pop and it'll be just a nice kind of farewell for Bret Hart. It's not what we got, and in my opinion, this match actually tarnishes Bret Hart's legacy. And for all the great WrestleMania matches that I've talked about that he had, at 13 and at 12 and at 10 and at 8, I mean, just the great Bret Hart WrestleMania classics. This one is every bit as bad as those matches are good, and it's God, I look back on this match and I really wish they hadn't done it because I think one of the best things I could say about Bret Hart's career before this happened was that I never saw him diminish. I never saw him become one of those guys, one of those old farts that just kind of goes into the ring, hits his one trademark spot, and that's it, and gets a pop. Or, gets in the ring and tries to work a match when he's completely incapable of doing so. And unfortunately, that happened here with Bret, and it makes me sad because I really do feel like this tarnished his legacy. And but not to the point that it makes me look back on his other classics with disdain or make me think of him or make me think any less of the prime of his career. And in the prime of his career, even during the down years, through the highs and the lows, Bret Hart was one of the absolute best of all time. And during those post-Hogan years when things looked bleak, at the very least, you could count on Bret Hart to deliver a great match and to have a good storyline in place to really deliver the goods. And that was Bret Hart's ultimate contribution to WrestleMania, is that he was Mr. Reliable, and no one can ever take that away from the Hitman. He was one of the absolute best. Next up, we are showcasing the very first inductee into the WWF WWE Hall of Fame, Andre the Giant. And Andre's contribution to WrestleMania is simply being Andre the Giant. And where a lot of modern-day giants have really failed, like the Great Khali and the Big Show, is that they don't book them nowadays the way they did Andre back then. I mean, Andre back then was believably unbeatable. Like, they built him up as this unstoppable force unlike anything else in wrestling. And they were able to get some huge matches out of that and huge attractions for the early WrestleManias. And, without Andre the Giant, I think the first 4 WrestleManias are significantly less important. And he was very important and significant in building that foundation, for building a legacy for WrestleMania to eventually grow, develop, and evolve from. Andre deserves, to me, he deserves a lot of credit for the early success of WrestleMania. And a lot of it just stems from the fact that he was this beloved star, he was a worldwide attraction, and they dedicated themselves to keeping him as strong as possible and making him look like a giant, which is, I could sit here all day and list all the times they've screwed that up with Big Show. That's basically the story of Big Show's career, screwing up the giant. And Big Show's very talented, and I would argue that, if Big Show and maybe even Great Khali, if they were around in the 70s, they may have eclipsed Andre. Because I think Big Show's more athletic and Khali has a better look, but they didn't get the same star treatment than Andre did. And Andre played the role perfectly. He was the Giant, and he would throw people around and have great feats of strength. And early on, he was a lovable, character. Fans loved him because he seemed genuinely nice and genuinely friendly, except when his opponents would piss him off. And that radiated and connected with the fans, and they were able to get so much out of Andre. And to me, he's almost as important as Hogan to those early WrestleManias, I think. And without him, I don't know if WrestleMania would have been as big of a success as it became. But let's start with his time at WrestleMania, starting with the very first WrestleMania and one of the star attractions of that show, which still gets talked about to this day. The Slam match between him and Big John Studd, where Andre put up his career, and Big John Studd and his manager Bobby Heenan put up $10,000. I think it was 10. It was either 15,000 or 10,000. I'm actually forgetting at the moment, but they put up a boatload of money. Let's say that, and the challenge was that if Big John Studd could slam Andre the Giant, he'd retire, and if Andre could slam Big John Studd, he'd win the money. And this match was it was the first big man battle of the Giants to ever happen at WrestleMania, and that's somewhat become a staple, for better or worse. Sometimes you get a really good Undertaker match, like his matches with Diesel or Kane, or you get a really bad, horrible match like Kane versus Khali at 23. But it really was the first major big man battle of the Giants to ever happen at WrestleMania. And for their limitations, and for two big guys, I mean, they're not going to be able to do that much with each other. Really, all the fans wanted out of this match was to see Andre slam Studd. It's like they built this match around that one thing that everybody wanted, and they gave it. Andre just went in there, they kind of knocked each other around for 4 minutes, and then Andre slammed him, and that the fans got what they wanted out of that match. And then there's that, shot that lives on in Mania highlights forever, where Andre takes the bag of money and starts throwing it into the crowd, and Bobby Heenan snatches the bag away and runs away. I mean, that right there is probably the first WrestleMania moment. That is probably like the first really key, significant thing to ever happen at a WrestleMania, and it lives on in the memories of people to this day. It really is one of the defining moments of the first WrestleMania, and really helped to establish it as one of those larger-than-life shows. Even though it might not seem like much today, trust me, it was a huge deal back then. And from there on, we go to WrestleMania 2, where Andre was the biggest name in the WWF versus NFL Battle Royal, and and this match included his rival Big John Studd, it included Bruno Sammartino, as I said before, it included the Hart Foundation, where he last eliminated Bret Hart, and Andre won. Andre was given the win. Here we are. It's a major attraction that the WWF wants to sell. It's one of their biggest attractions for WrestleMania 2. I felt like it worked. I thought it was really entertaining. And Andre got the win. And, they'd always built up Andre as the king of Battle Royals. And he's won more Battle Royals than anybody in the history of wrestling. And that was sort of one of Andre's major attributes when talking about his career, is that he was the king of Battle Royals. And this was no exception. And so Andre was the winner in the biggest Battle Royal in WrestleMania history. Or the most significant Battle Royal, definitely. And it was a big match and a big win for Andre, and once again, it just shows how much of a star he really was, that they decided to give him the win in such a major attraction and really use him as one of the major selling points of this match. I mean, there were 3 main events on the show. There was the Hogan match, the Piper match, and the Andre match. And I would say the Andre match was actually the best one of the 3. That one was the most fun anyway. And really enjoyed that Battle Royal. But then we come to what I feel is the crowning achievement of Andre the Giant's career. It's often considered the crowning achievement of Hogan's career, and rightfully so. But I think Andre deserves a lot of credit for the main event at WrestleMania 3. I think the championship match that they had really set the bar and really wrote the blueprint on how to build a strong WrestleMania main event. It's how to do an awesome friends turned enemy storyline. I mean, that Piper's Pit segment they did, where Andre ripped the cross off of Hogan and threw it on the ground, that was just amazing television for the time, and really one of the first really great moments in building a huge WrestleMania main event. It was classy, and they did so many things with this build-up to make it seem larger than life. And again, going into how well they booked Andre as a Giant, because keep in mind, Andre's health was not the best at this point. He basically had one foot in the grave at this point. I'm sorry to say, but it's true. Andre was billed as being unbeatable. And you go into this match with a guy who's been champion for over 3 years, and you're thinking Hogan has no chance. And they were able to convey that. It's like, oh my God, Hogan's screwed. He's going to lose. This is the toughest challenge he's ever had. He's going to lose. And that's the difference between Hogan and Andre in 87 and, Big Show and John Cena in 2012. Nobody thinks for a minute that Big Show is going to lose, but WrestleMania 3, there was a lot of doubt that Hogan was going to walk out that night with the title. I remember they even made a personalized belt for Andre that he could wear. They really made it look like he was going to win. And obviously this match was a huge attraction. It was a huge success. I mean, WrestleMania 3 was the first really huge WrestleMania. And Andre was a big part of that. And without Andre the Giant, the main event of the show is lacking a lot. And that moment where Hogan goes to body slam Andre and Andre falls on top of him and Gomez gets the 3 instantly, that's a great WrestleMania moment. And of course the moment where Hogan slams Andre at the end after hulking up, that is the defining WrestleMania moment that really... it's arguably the greatest WrestleMania moment of all time. And while Hogan gets a lot of the credit for this, as he deserves, Andre deserves a lot of it as well. I think it's the crowning achievement of his career. It's the biggest match of his career, and really kind of the pinnacle of him as the unstoppable giant. It was the ultimate payoff to him being booked so strong for all those years, and it really took advantage of the fact that he was as big a star as he was. And it wasn't just all Hogan. It was... Andre was a major key component in making that whole thing work, and it was fantastic. The next year, Andre would have a rematch with Hogan in the championship tournament, which was set up through the main event. Backtracking a little bit, Hogan and Andre had their rematch at the main event on live TV, and that was also one of the biggest matches in wrestling history. Certainly one of the biggest rematches. And they did the whole angle where Ted DiBiase bought out Andre to steal the title just so he could sell the belt to DiBiase. And it was a great character-building moment for Ted DiBiase. I mean, that moment where Andre hands him the championship, and he puts the belt on, it really is, to me, one of the greatest heel moments of all time, and really set DiBiase above and beyond any other heel that had ever come before him. It was really great. And again, Andre was a key component in making that whole thing work. In the tournament, he wrestled Hogan again, and they wrestled to a double disqualification, which was bullshit, by the way, because Hogan swung the chair first, so I think Andre should have won that match. But the referee and not following the rules. The match was kind of just short and sweet, nowhere near as legendary as the WrestleMania 3 match. It was just kind of, let's get to the point, eliminate both guys as quickly as possible so we can get to the main event. And Andre's role in the main event, it was so great that you actually had Andre in DiBiase's corner, and you had Hogan in Savage's corner. So it was like last year's main event is still kind of radiating off, and other people are getting a rub from that huge match. It's really weird how that kind of worked out. But Andre was great in DiBiase's corner and played a huge role in making that main event work as well as it did. And so did Hogan. I think their roles in aligning with DiBiase and Savage, respectively, was really added a lot to that match and really added a lot to the ultimate outcome where Randy Savage won. And again, yes, that was Randy Savage's night, no question, but Andre played a huge role in that as well. And him as being the unfair force that gave DiBiase an edge, that led to Hogan having to come out to equal things out. And Jesse Ventura had that great call where he was like, when Hogan came out, and he was like, okay, now there'll be no excuses either way. And there was really such a well-done main event, well-booked, and great ending. And like I said, Andre was a major key component in that. Next up, Andre was kind of relegated to the undercard. He had a mid-card grudge match with Jake the Snake Roberts, which I actually really like that feud because, again, Andre, even though he lost the matches to Hogan, he was still viewed as being this unstoppable giant. But Jake the Snake had the one weapon that could neutralize Andre, which was Damien the Snake. Andre the Giant had a fear of snakes. And I really liked that there was that bit of vulnerability there. It's like, oh, he found Andre's Achilles heel. He hates snakes and he's afraid of them. And that was kind of that was Jake's equalizing force when put up there against Andre. Big John Studd was the referee of this match, which I thought was kind of pointless. Of course, Andre beat the crap out of him, which was cool. And that led to Andre being disqualified. But overall, the match was entertaining for what it was. Again, Andre's health was really declining by this point, but they did a lot of antics with DiBiase trying to steal the snake, and Andre had taken off the turnbuckle pad before the match even started and threw Jake into it, and yeah, it was entertaining for what it was. Not one of Andre's more glamorous moments, obviously, but it was entertaining. And then we get to Andre's final WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 6, the first international WrestleMania. The Tag Team Championship match. The champions, Andre the Giant and Haku, the Colossal Connection, defeating Demolition. Or they defending their titles against Demolition. Demolition would win the title. Sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion there. But, this was really a big match. And maybe it's just because it was Andre the Giant, but the fans in attendance really reacted to this match like it was a main event. It was only like the second or third match on the card, I think. It came fairly early. And they reacted to Demolition like Hogan had just come out. It was great. And, a very high energy, very entertaining match. Andre never legally got tagged in, which again is another indication of his declining health. But the match was still entertaining and really emotionally charged, and Demolition won the tag titles. Again, really cool. I really enjoyed the match and the way they did that. And this is where Gorilla Monsoon and Jesse Ventura kind of missed a call here, where if you've ever seen the match where the Colossal Connection beat Demolition for the tag titles, the reason they won that match, and Jesse Ventura really sold that on commentary, was they dominated Demolition and Axe and Smash were never able to tag. And because they were able to neutralize them and prevent them from ever tagging in and out, the Colossal Connection were able to win that match fairly easily. And in this match, it kind of was a role reversal where the Demolition was like, okay, we'll neutralize the Giant by keeping Haku in the ring the whole time. So it felt like that was Demolition's strategy, and they learned from the previous match. And I wish that Monsoon and Ventura had made that call, but that I'm just nitpicking. But more memorable than the match itself was after the match where Andre is arguing with Bobby the Brain Heenan, and Bobby Heenan slaps Andre across the face, and Andre beats the ever-living crap out of him and basically turns face again. And he beats the crap out of Haku and throws him around, and Heenan and Haku try to run into the ring cart to get away, and Andre tosses them out of it and takes the ring cart himself. It was really a great moment, and for a final WrestleMania match, and nobody knew that this was Andre's retirement at the time, but as a final WrestleMania match, it was really a great send-off for Andre, and a wonderful moment. I mean, that's one of those moments. I've talked about it with Savage and Liz reuniting, or Hogan losing to Warrior, how that probably should have been the end of their run. This was a great way to end Andre's run. It was really a nice send-off for him, and I'm kind of glad that it was his last WrestleMania match. And, it really left a nice, positive, lasting impression from Andre the Giant. Of course, it wasn't his final WrestleMania. He would make an appearance at WrestleMania 7 the next year, during the Intercontinental title match between champion Mr. Perfect and the Big Boss Man. Really good match. Andre's appearance, it wasn't that special overall. It was cool just to see him and get a little bit more revenge on Bobby Heenan and stuff like that. It wasn't a glamorous moment for him, but it was a nice little special appearance to do that with Andre. And Andre the Giant would pass away a couple years later because, again, his declining health. I mean, there's only so much you could do at that point. And, but when it's all said and done, Andre the Giant is one of the greatest legends in wrestling history. He's the best booked Giant of all time, and that was really the major key to his success, that they knew how to book him as a dominant, just larger-than-life icon. And when you're trying to build a larger-than-life event like WrestleMania, you can't ask for somebody better than Andre the Giant to really do that with. And, a lot of credit goes to Hogan for the early WrestleManias, a lot of credit goes to Piper, a lot of credit goes to Savage, and they deserve it. But Andre the Giant, in my mind, is right up there with them. I think he's one of the pioneers of WrestleMania, and it is a lot more significant having Andre the Giant as part of their history, compared to a lot of other guys. Andre the Giant, he was an absolute legend, no doubt about it. Well, I shouldn't even have to say what Undertaker is most known for at WrestleMania. I think everybody watching this video pretty much knows. He's known for the streak, which currently stands at 20-0. And for anybody to be at that many WrestleManias in a wrestling capacity is pretty remarkable in of itself. So that really speaks to the longevity that Undertaker has had. And, how talented he really is to be able to last that long and to be able to have that many matches at WrestleMania. But the streak itself is a wonderful example of dedicated booking to where they've really found this major attraction in the streak that people really get invested in, and they've just run with it. And they didn't even realize what they had until about 7 or 8. It's like, oh hey, he's unbeaten at Mania, let's run with this. And Undertaker at WrestleMania, regardless of what he's doing, and he's had some iffy ones, but regardless of what he's doing, it does feel like a main event all to itself, just because it's like, okay, I mean, the streak's on the line, so it's part of that. And all the matches he's had at WrestleMania really do feel like it's part of one great bigger storyline that's been, has over 2 decades worth of build put into it. I mean, it really is a wonderful piece of booking and one of the star attractions at WrestleMania. And I would argue, especially in this day and age, that ending Undertaker's streak would mean so much more than winning a world title at this point. So it is something that they built 2 decades into, and they could potentially use to build a huge star for the future. Whether or not they do that, or, they could turn around and just have Cena end it, which I think is going to happen, or they could never end the streak at all. It doesn't really matter. It's just they've really put a lot into this streak, and there are still possibilities that they could do with it that kind of keep us guessing for the most part. Although, if you look at the Undertaker streak and all 20 matches that he's had, I can literally count on one hand the number of times I honestly thought he was going to lose, and that's kind of the problem with a lot of Undertaker Mania matches, is where him winning is pretty much a foregone conclusion. And we'll get to the ones where I thought he might lose, so I'll certainly get to those. But, most of the time it is very predictable that Undertaker's going to win at WrestleMania. And in recent years, it's gotten to the point where if they ever end the streak, they're going to have to do it at the hands of a gunshot. Because, I mean, there's so many times it was like 80 chair shots and sledgehammer shots and finishers up the wazoo. It's like Undertaker can't be beaten in Mania, and if they ever do end the streak, they're going to have to come up with something big to make me buy it, because, I mean, he's kicked out of everything you could possibly imagine. But the positive of the streak is that people are so invested in it that they've been able to create a lot of big matches with it, especially in more recent years. So let's get started. The Undertaker debuted with the company in 1990 at Survivor Series and had his first WrestleMania match at WrestleMania 7. And this is going to be a little awkward to talk about, but, I promise you it is purely a coincidence that I'm doing The Undertaker showcasing the Immortals the same week that Paul Bearer died. I was literally sitting down, I was just getting ready to film it, and then I got a text message saying that Paul Bearer had passed away. And it's sad, and it's really eerie too, because I knew I was obviously going to be talking about Paul Bearer in this video, because you really can't talk about Undertaker's career without talking about Paul Bearer. Paul Bearer is one of the most remarkable managers of all time, and one of the best babyface managers. That's another thing, because you didn't have many babyface male managers that succeeded, but Paul Bearer really stood out and really helped to sell that gimmick of The Undertaker, and really helped with the overall presentation, and really helped to have it get some traction in the early years. I think Paul Bearer was a huge part of the success of The Undertaker with the urn and the look, and as a mouthpiece for The Undertaker, oh, yes! I mean, that great voice, I mean, that was just a wonderful character. So uniquely weird. I loved it. And as I said at the beginning of the video, this is dedicated to the memory of William Moody, better known to us fans as Paul Bearer. And he's going to be coming up a lot in this. But that brings us to WrestleMania 7, where The Undertaker faced Superfly Jimmy Snuka with Paul Bearer in Undertaker's corner. Undertaker was a heel by this point. I don't know if they'd had a plan with him yet. They just knew that they had a gimmick that worked. And The Undertaker was a gimmick that by all rights should have failed, because on paper it is absolutely ridiculous. But you had that really weird and unique manager. You had this awesome presentation with the character, the right guy in the role. And the reason that Mark Calloway worked so well in the role is, and watch Mark Calloway's work prior to this, he really wasn't that good. He was still pretty green as Mean Mark Callis, and you know, I think he was the Punisher at one point, and all the other gimmicks that he'd had. He was very green, and this gimmick really gave him something to where it was very uniquely presented. And what he was bad at the time, you know, he didn't know how to sell that well, and he couldn't tan worth anything. So they basically just gave him a zombie gimmick where it's like, all right, he doesn't have to sell, and him being pale as snow actually helps him out. It helps with the look. So that was the ingenious, the true genius of the Undertaker character back then. Is that it hit a lot of Mark Calloway's weaknesses early on in his career when he was really green. And this match with Jimmy Snuka, I mean, it's basically just a squash match. It was clear that they wanted to do something with Undertaker, and maybe was even setting him up at that point to face guys like Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, which he would do plenty of times later in the year. But this was basically just a squash match to establish the character as this dominant force, and, you know, it's the first match in the streak. And in 1991, nobody knew what was coming as far as the streak or anything else goes, but Undertaker got his first win over Hall of Famer Jimmy Snuka that year. Then we get to WrestleMania 8, which was his first real grudge match at WrestleMania, where he worked with Jake the Snake Roberts. They had a partnership, and then Undertaker turned face. And I have to tell you, the feud was kind of rushed, but when Undertaker turned face, I have never seen fans really flock to a heel turn face that quickly. Like, they, like, almost overnight, it was like, okay, Undertaker's the most popular guy in the company. Because people loved the gimmick, they loved the character. All they needed to do was turn him face, and they just accepted him almost immediately. It was great. And this match, again, it's not the greatest match in the world. It was pretty much just a dominating win to make Undertaker look good and, you know, give him that win over Jake, because Jake was leaving at that point. But the cool thing I'll always remember about this match was the finish, and I thought it was a really great way to establish Undertaker as this unstoppable force. He sat up after Jake Roberts' DDT, and you know, for those of you who were too young and don't remember what it was like back then, when Jake Roberts hit the DDT, shit was done. It was over. Nobody got up from the DDT. It was like, forget, like, you know, getting up. It's like, okay, you're staying down for 3. I mean, there's no doubt. Once he hit the DDT, you knew it was over. Undertaker didn't kick out of the DDT. He sat up from 2 of them. And it really was like, oh my God. It put Undertaker on that same pedestal as like Hulk Hogan or the Ultimate Warrior, where it's like, wow, he is unstoppable. This guy is unlike any normal human being that wrestling currently has. He's great. And of course, he won after he tombstoned Jake on the floor. That was win number 2. And then we get to WrestleMania 9, where they put him up against Giant Gonzalez, a guy who dwarfed him in height. And that was the appeal of doing that match, is that it was like, oh, maybe, you know, Undertaker is out of his element here up against the Giant. And this match is often remembered as being one of Mania's all-time worst. Personally, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that great. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the greatest match of all time. And I fully understand that Giant Gonzalez is a horrible worker, possibly the worst worker in the history of wrestling. But he didn't really get a chance to show it in this match. It was very basic. Undertaker basically just bumped and sold for him, and it was short, so it didn't even have time to be boring. I personally didn't think the match was that bad, and the fans were way into Taker, so it had the investment. And quite honestly, I thought the ending they did, where Gonzalez knocked out Undertaker with ether, which was a bit gimmicky, but alright, he knocked him out, and Undertaker had to be taken out on a stretcher. And I was like, whoa, you've never seen that happen to Undertaker before. And then Gonzalez is in the ring taunting the fans, and then all of a sudden, gong. And then Undertaker storms down to the ring with his eyes rolled back into his head. And I thought it was a really cool moment. And then he storms the ring and clotheslines Gonzalez, and he goes down and finally knocks down the Giant. And I thought it was a pretty cool moment. I thought it was a really cool, again, establishing Undertaker as this unstoppable force. And I thought it came off rather well. I never thought of it as one of the worst matches in WrestleMania history. It's not one of the best, sure, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and I thought it did a lot for Undertaker in establishing his character, for sure. And also, I thought the entrance he had this year was really cool, too. It was the first really cool Undertaker entrance, where he came out with the bird and on the chariot and everything, and obviously the Undertaker entrance would become one of the greatest theatrical things. Just awe-inspiring, just... You know, a lot of the appeal of Undertaker's matches are just the entrance and what, you know, bells and whistles they pull out to make it work. You know, druids with torches and him gliding down to the ring on a moving platform rather than walking down, and all kinds of weird things that they've cooked up, and fire and smoke and all that jazz. It's really, really cool what they've done with Undertaker's entrances over the years. He missed WrestleMania 10 after losing the casket match to Yokozuna at Royal Rumble 94, where it took 10 people to beat him. Again, another moment that really established Undertaker as a badass, because it was like, it took 10 people just to lock him in a box. That's wow, that's a pretty dominant force right there. Then we move right on to WrestleMania 11. Now, this match sucked. Undertaker versus King Kong Bundy. It was boring. It was sloppy. They did the whole angle where the $1 Million Corporation, Ted DiBiase and all them, had stolen the urn. And Kama Mustafa came out during the match and took the urn and said he was going to melt it down into jewelry. If you don't know who Kama Mustafa is, he would ultimately go on to play The Godfather. And he was Papa Shango before that gimmick. The match was just boring. It was horrible. I always remember he beat King Kong Bundy with a clothesline because he couldn't get him up for the tombstone. He tried to, but he ended up having to body slam him because he couldn't quite get him over for the tombstone. So it was like, that was a bad match and one of Undertaker's worst, without question. So moving right along. Then we got a really good one. He faced Diesel at WrestleMania 12, which was another one of those trademark big man matches that I've talked about with Andre. It was a good, solid big man match between two, well-built big guys. And ultimately, Taker won, of course. He got up from the jackknife and gave him the tombstone. It was over. It was a pretty good, solid match, I thought. And Undertaker's best match up to this point, and his biggest match up to this point, because Diesel was the, whether you like him or not, he was the highest caliber opponent that Undertaker had up to this point. Because, Snuka was at the back end of his career. Jake was on the way out. Gonzalez was no good. Bundy was way past his prime. This is the first time he was put up against, like, a current legit star with some credibility to him. Of course, as we all would come to know, Diesel was on the way out too, but again, it was still a big match. They had built up for a few months too, so really good work there. Then we're right back to one of Undertaker's worst, the main event at WrestleMania 13, where he beat Psycho Sid for the WWF title, and this match was boring because there was no plan put into it. There was no animosity or feud or anything. It was just something that they threw together because Shawn Michaels lost his smile, and because of that, the match didn't have a whole lot of substance to it. And even the thing that this match had going for it, which was, oh, well, at least I get to see Taker win the title, they ruined that by having Bret Hart cost Sid the title, so essentially turning Sid face. So Undertaker's title win was completely tainted. I don't know why they did that, but it's what they did. Excuse me. And it resulted in one of the weakest and most boring main events in WrestleMania history. But Undertaker was one of the guys that won the title at WrestleMania. Was one of the guys that held the title up. And he would do it a couple more times, whether we liked it or not. And so moving right along to, in my opinion, not only one of my favorites, I would go as far to say it's actually my personal favorite in Undertaker's entire run at WrestleMania. I know there are a few coming up the pike that fans really like, but this one's my personal favorite. His match with Kane at WrestleMania 14. I think it's awesome. I think the storyline they built into this, with Kane being his long-lost brother, seeking revenge against The Undertaker for burning him as a child, and blaming Undertaker for the fire that killed their parents and all this other stuff. And Paul Bearer, by this point, had turned on Undertaker and had, brought Kane back and was the mouthpiece for this silent monster that was like something out of a horror movie like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers. It was really a very well done feud and very, one of the high points of The Undertaker's career. Certainly the high point of Kane's, because they never quite got the character to be as cool as he was in that, that initial Undertaker feud. And, this is one of the few times that I really thought Undertaker was going to lose. I not only thought he was going to lose at Mania this year, I was certain of it. I honestly thought it's like, all right, they're setting up Kane to be the new Undertaker, and he's going to be this dominant force, and Undertaker's going to lose. And that's what I thought, and it was brilliant how they set this match up, because remember what I talked about? Undertaker had beaten Giants, and it took 10 people to beat him at the Royal Rumble in that casket match. But here, Kane dominated him. So after all these years of being a total badass and just being unbeatable, Undertaker looked completely helpless in there against Kane. And he had to employ different strategies. He had to use the rope-a-dope to try and get Kane to punch himself out. He had to use his speed and agility rather than relying on his power, because matching power with Kane wasn't going to work. And Undertaker had never been in a situation like that before. It was really just a wonderfully crafted match. It actually sort of reminded me of Hogan Andre in that sense, where you had this ultimate unbeatable babyface going up against a force that clearly dwarfed him and overpowered him. And it was a wonderfully set up situation. When Kane kicked out of the tombstone, I was like, what? And back then it was unthinkable. Now it's like an expected occurrence at WrestleMania, but back then it was completely unthinkable. And they did so many things in this match, like Undertaker diving over the ropes and Kane sidestepping him and slamming him through the table. I mean, it looked like Undertaker was completely out of his element in this match, and it was a wonderfully told story in that ring. I just loved every minute of this. And, Undertaker won, obviously, but this match was just fantastic. It's my favorite feud, my favorite storyline, and my favorite Undertaker WrestleMania match. I think it's a true Mania gem, with all the time they put into building it, to all the little touches they put into the match itself, to the sheer dominance of Kane's character, to the helplessness of Undertaker, and the vulnerability of Undertaker's character, because he also, kind of like what Bret did going into his match with Owen at 10, where it's like, I don't want to fight my brother, and it was a very human, emotional side to Undertaker that we'd never really seen before, so that was great. It was a wonderfully crafted match, and I think it's the shining achievement of Undertaker at WrestleMania. It's my personal favorite that he ever had, and that's just my take on that. But then again, we're kind of seeing a pattern here. It's kind of like the Star Trek movies. Evens are good, odds are bad. We go into WrestleMania 15, and of course this is the last bad one of the odd ones, I think. But WrestleMania 15, he has one of the worst matches of all time with the Big Boss Man in the Hell in a Cell match. I think it's the worst match of Undertaker's career. It's just horrible all around. I think it tarnished the legacy of Hell in a Cell. I think it tarnishes Undertaker's legacy because it happened. It's a boring, awful match that offered nothing except for the visual at the end where Undertaker had the Brood hang Boss Man from the Hell in a Cell. That was cool, but it wasn't worth sitting through that match just to get that. It was absolutely terrible. It was as good as, and as much as I loved the Kane match from the year before, this one is equally as bad. This one is just absolutely horrible. It's really weird how you go from the best to the worst just so quickly, but just, that match gives me chills. It's so bad. But then Undertaker took the next year off again because of injury. And then he came back at WrestleMania 17, and by this point he was doing the American Badass, which was the motorcycle gimmick. And some people were mixed on it. And I do prefer the Dead Man, and I did prefer the Dead Man, but keep in mind, and I should have mentioned this talking about WrestleMania 15, he had done the Ministry of Darkness at this point, which was a satanic cult, and really the ultimate extreme with that Undertaker character. And to me, it's really hard to kind of take that to... I mean, once you've done satanic cult and human sacrifices, I mean, what do you do after that? You almost have to go to something different just to give the Dead Man a break. And I felt like the American Badass really kind of freshened him up a little bit and gave him something different where he could be more himself. And it gave the Dead Man a nice break, I thought, if nothing else. So he was doing, the American Badass at WrestleMania 17, and he was working with Triple H, which was a very good pairing because it was like the last really great Attitude Era pairing that we'd never really gotten. Triple H was the ultimate heel in 2000, basically ruled the show, and Undertaker was this grizzled veteran by this point, and they'd never really crossed paths on pay-per-view, so it was a really good match to have. This is another one that I honestly thought Undertaker was going to lose, and the reason I thought he was going to lose, because this, to my recollection, this is the first time they ever really made anything out of the streak, where they would mention it. In hyping the match, they would mention, Undertaker is undefeated at WrestleMania, he's never lost. And in my mind, that made me think, oh, well, that means he's going to lose, because you just mentioned it. You mentioned that he's undefeated at Mania, so that means Triple H is going to beat him and get the heat from that. Didn't happen. Undertaker won. So I was wrong. Little did I know that we were going to get 11 more matches with him. It's coming up on 12 at 29. And but I thought the match itself was really fun. I thought it was this really wild and chaotic brawl that really lived up to the build-up they'd had, where Triple H had put a restraining order. Well, Stephanie McMahon, Helmsley, had put a restraining order on Undertaker, and that was able to keep Triple H and Undertaker away from each other for most of the build-up. And so when they get to the Mania match, after Triple H had just been a complete dick and beating up Undertaker every chance he got, cheap shot at him every chance he got. You get this really wild and chaotic match where they fight all over the crowd. He chokeslams him off the scaffolding. Yeah, I mean, the landing, there's some obvious padding there, but it was still a nice visual on the way down the initial spot. And it's just total wild chaos, and Triple H using the sledgehammer and hitting him on the last ride before he could hit the powerbomb. And that right there was one of those moments. So he hit him with the sledgehammer, streaks over, and of course, Undertaker kicked out and hit the last ride for real. And got the win. And it was a really exciting match. I really do like that one. I think it's the best one of his run as the American Badass, for sure. Then we come to his 10th WrestleMania match where he faces Ric Flair in a street fight. Now, this was one of those matches where I was like, okay, if Old Man Flair ends the streak, that would be fucking horrible. They better not do that. And they didn't. Undertaker won. And that visual of him standing on the apron after the match where he puts up his fingers and counts to 10, that's a great visual and totally worthy of being on Mania highlights forever. I wish he'd done something similar when he went 20. Of course, now they have a graphic for it, so I guess he doesn't have to do that. But it was a great milestone for the streak, and it really shows like, wow, they're really going to try and go the long haul with this. I never envisioned it would go all the way to 20, but again, it just shows their dedication. And this match itself, I thought it was good. I thought it was a nice, violent, brutal match where Undertaker basically just beat the shit out of Flair. And thankfully, he got the win. We got a special appearance from Arn Anderson, who personally is my favorite member of the Four Horsemen. So it was really cool to see Arn. And Undertaker, kicked both their asses, won, and got his 10th Mania win. It was a really big one. And Ric Flair, at the very least, is a name that carries a lot of value to it. So when you look at WrestleMania's, or you look at Undertaker's streak at WrestleMania, you can say, he beat this guy, he beat this guy, he beat this guy, he beat this guy, and he also beat Ric Flair. So it really added at least name value to the streak. He's not just beating a bunch of jabronis. Now, this would not be the case at WrestleMania 11, or WrestleMania 19, I'm sorry. God, I'm getting behind myself. But, now, how sad is this one? It was supposed to be Undertaker and Nathan Jones versus Big Show and A-Train in a tag team match, which is pretty unspectacular. I mean, this WrestleMania had so many main events from Hogan McMahon, Austin Rock 3 and their final encounter, Shawn and Jericho, and then the 2 world title matches. And it's like, wow, poor Taker got left with nothing, but he just gets this throwaway tag match. It was like, oh, that's kind of sad. But Nathan Jones, who had great vignettes building him up, by the way, and had potential to be one of the greatest characters in wrestling history, was so bad in the ring that the WWE did not trust him to fuck it up. So they took him out of the match through an injury angle, and Undertaker went in there in a handicap match situation. Now, the other two things that stand out about this, aside from Nathan Jones just being so bad that they didn't even trust him to work a tag match where he could stand on the apron most of the time, the two things that really stand out is that Undertaker is facing 2 guys. And also, the other thing that stands out is that one of those guys is the Big Show, who's a giant. It really speaks volumes to how predictable a lot of Undertaker's WrestleMania matches are, and B, how worthless Big Show is as a giant, because how little they dedicated themselves to him being a giant, in that Undertaker is stuck in a match, in a handicap match, against 2 guys, one of them a giant, and not at all for 1 minute did I honestly think that Undertaker was going to lose. It was a foregone conclusion that Undertaker was going to win this match, and it's really one of his most unspectacular Mania matches. I'm just sitting there like, he's up against 2 guys, and one of them is 7 feet tall, 400 pounds, and not for a minute did I honestly think that he was going to lose. It's kind of pathetic, but it is what it is. It's the weakest Undertaker match at WrestleMania during his run as the American Badass, without a doubt. It's so unspectacular and forgettable. It's pretty remarkable, actually, how forgettable it is. But then we go to the Return of the Dead Man, which came at WrestleMania 20. Now, they put him up against Kane again, which, okay, it's repetitive, but Kane was a nice character to use to kind of usher back in the Dead Man. So, okay, I'll go with it. And they've done so many great things in the build-up where it's like they really... Because they've done this before where Undertaker would get hurt and then come back, where they made us think he was coming back as the Dead Man, but he only just came back as the American Badass. Here, they did a lot of things to tell us, from the gong going off and lights going out and caskets being placed all over the ring. It's like, no, he's coming back as the Dead Man at WrestleMania 20, where it all begins again, which really fit the tagline now that I think about it. So it was really highly anticipated. It's, oh my God, he's coming back as the Dead Man. That's really cool. After a 4 or 5 year break, it's like he's coming back as the Dead Man. This will be awesome. And you get to it, and the entrance was amazing. He came back with Paul Bearer, which, again, wonderful touch to get Paul Bearer back for this huge return for the Dead Man. Bit of an unexpected surprise at the time. I don't recall it being rumored that Paul Bearer was going to be there. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was really, really well done. The entrance was amazing. When he comes out with the trench coat and the hat and everything, it's like, oh my God, The Undertaker is back. And it's great. And then the match starts. And it's kind of, A, it's a squash match, and B, it was just the American Badass again. It wasn't really overly indicative of the Dead Man. Yes, he sat up, and yes, he did the tombstone, but other than that, it was pretty much all American Badass again. He even looked like the American Badass. He dressed like the American Badass. He didn't have the Undertaker outfit or anything indicative that we could link to the original old school Undertaker. So that was really disappointing. It was kind of like, okay, great entrance, but then you get to the match and it's just kind of the same thing we'd already had before. So that was kind of disappointing. But the entrance was really cool, and having Paul Bearer there was really cool. So, it balances out in that aspect, I guess, but it's nowhere near the Kane and Undertaker match from 14. Not even close. I mean, this, like I said, Kane basically got squashed here. He was basically just a throwaway opponent to feed to the return of the Dead Man. But now we go to WrestleMania 21, which again I think is one of Undertaker's finest. He faced the Legend Killer Randy Orton, so they sold this match as Legend versus Legend Killer. It was the 13th match in the streak, so it kind of had like this unlucky number 13 kind of thing going for it that they played with, where it's like, okay, is it the unlucky number for Randy Orton, or is it the unlucky number for Undertaker, where the streak will finally end? And I thought that was a nice touch as well. But this match at WrestleMania 21 is the last time I truly felt like the streak could possibly end. This was a match because Orton was one of their future stars, and they'd invested a lot in him. And I thought, oh my God, and he'd beaten every legend that crossed his path, except for Triple H. That goes without saying. And he'd beaten everybody. He'd beaten every legend from Mick Foley and humiliated everybody, handed out RKOs like they were candy. It was just, Orton was just the guy that they were investing in. And I thought, oh my God, they might have him beat Undertaker and end the streak, which would be a huge win to give somebody to push for the future. And I thought, oh my God, I think it's a really strong possibility. And then this match, first of all, not knowing the outcome and thinking, oh my God, Undertaker winning at Mania is not a foregone conclusion for once, made the match even more exciting, because I was like, I really don't know who's going to win this. And it's genuinely interesting and exciting to have that. And I thought it made the match so much better. And it was a really great match, I thought. But there's that one moment, this one awesome moment, when Undertaker goes for the chokeslam. And Randy Orton counters it into the RKO, which that is truly an RKO out of nowhere. That was a really great counter. I remember watching that live, and I jumped out of my chair and yelled, oh my God, the streak is over. There was that moment right there when I knew, oh my God, it's over. It's like, in my heart, I knew the streak was over. And that's the last time I truly felt that way. Even in some of the matches that would come later where he had kick out after kick out after kick out, I never truly believed the streak was over. This match, after that move with that RKO, I truthfully believed for that brief 5 or 10 seconds that the streak had come to an end. And that was a wonderful WrestleMania moment. That was a great, shocking moment that really added to this match. Of course, Undertaker kicked out and came back and won the match anyway. But for that to really convince me for those few seconds that the streak was over, that was wonderful stuff. I mean, that was absolutely fantastic. And kudos to actually creating that moment and making me think, ever so briefly, that the streak was actually going to end. And I think it's one of the best moments in any Undertaker WrestleMania match, just for the sheer drama that it created and just the sense of finality. Like, I really thought it was over. And oh my God, the Legend Killer did it. And but no, Undertaker won. He got his 13th, and that's fine. But then we move on to another unspectacular one at WrestleMania 22, where he faced Mark Henry on like his 85th push. And for the people that like Mark Henry now, I get it, because they're at least booking him like a monster, like they should have all along. And he's actually a more legit monster at this point than Big Show is. But, you know, Mark Henry sucked for 15 years. Let's remember that. Just because he's watchable now, it is kind of sad that it took him 15 years just to get to that point. So I have a hard time forgetting the 15 years where he was absolutely terrible. And this was bad Mark Henry, and he got push after push after push, and they would always either flop or he would get hurt. Who's more injury prone, Mark Henry or Rey Mysterio? I'm not sure, but this was bad Mark Henry here is what we were getting here. And Undertaker, again, there was no doubt that Taker was going to win this match. It was one of those matches where it was like, okay, Mark Henry ends his streak. I'm going to throw something at the TV. Because that is a perfectly smart thing to do, is when you get pissed off at something, to break your television. That's a perfectly logical response for any sane human being. And it was a boring match. It was just, the only things that kept it from not being as bad as it should have been were the fact that Undertaker, it was like watching Undertaker have a match with a tree trunk that he was just placing in spots. It's like, all right, stand here so I can chokeslam you. Stand here so I can tombstone you. Okay, I need you to stand here so I can do the over-the-top rope dive. Okay, now Mark, stand right here so I can powerbomb you. I need you to mount me in the corner so I can powerbomb you. And that was really all there was. It was Undertaker busting his ass to try and make that match even remotely respectful. But it's kind of a downer match. It was a casket match, though, which is kind of weird that no casket match had ever happened at WrestleMania before that point, because that is the Undertaker's trademark match. That's his key gimmick match. I mean, the casket match is to Undertaker what the ladder match is to Shawn Michaels, pretty much. It's just, and it's weird that it took him that long just to finally do one at WrestleMania, but it's not a very remarkable match. It's really only notable for the fact that it was the only casket match in WrestleMania history, but as far as being an interesting or exciting match, it's actually pretty dull, and one of his weaker ones. Then we move into another, well, not a main event, but a semi-main event for The Undertaker, where he faced Batista for the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania 23. And this one was the biggest match that the SmackDown brand had to offer at the time, because I remember at this point the SmackDown brand had nothing. They had nothing going for them, and it was a very empty show by that point. So doing this match, Batista versus Undertaker, was actually pretty big. It was the one really true marquee match that they'd had. You know, they invested so much in Batista, and obviously Undertaker was a goddamn legend by this point. So it was a match that basically wrote itself. Even though I don't feel like they ever did enough with the build-up. Like, they never really turned Batista heel, and they never made anybody the heel. It was just kind of like, oh, they're just two big guys that kind of sort of don't like each other and are going to have a match. I wish they'd done some more interesting things with that, but they did give Undertaker the Royal Rumble win that year after one of the best endings to any Royal Rumble, where him and Shawn Michaels basically had a match of the year contender in the last 15 minutes or 10 minutes of a Royal Rumble, which was pretty remarkable. So Undertaker got a Royal Rumble win, his first one ever. And he had this big match with Batista that wasn't the main event. They gave the main event spot to Cena and Michaels, but I thought this match was very good. I thought it was the best match at WrestleMania 23. It was my personal favorite. The crowd was so into Undertaker, it was insane. And they, you know, and Batista they booed, much like they booed Cena later in the show. And it was kind of weird that the two guys that they really invested in got booed, and the two legends that had been there forever were the ones that got cheered. It makes me wonder, you know, because, you know, they didn't boo Austin in favor of Taker in '98. So I don't know. I'm just, maybe it makes you wonder, you know, who they put their brain trust into as far as future stars go. But Batista and Undertaker had a really good match. It was a great power big man match where Batista could match power with Undertaker, and they did things like him blocking the chokeslam. Like Undertaker grabbed him around the throat, and Batista just took his hand and pushed him off, which I thought was a really great moment. And, you know, great show of, it's great that they showcased Batista as a guy that could really overpower and kind of manhandle Undertaker. Not to the level of Kane at WrestleMania 14, but good enough to make this match interesting in of itself. Of course, Undertaker won the title again. I think most of us expected it. This is another one where it was a foregone conclusion that Undertaker was going to win. But it was a really good match, and I think a very, very good one in WrestleMania's history. So kudos for that one. That one was very good. Then we move on to WrestleMania 24, which was Undertaker's second WrestleMania main event. He actually closed out the show with Edge for the World Heavyweight title. Now, Undertaker winning at WrestleMania as a foregone conclusion, that was about double this year. If you didn't know Undertaker was going to beat Edge this year, I feel sorry for you, because they made it as obvious as humanly possible. It's like, by the time they got to WrestleMania, there was no doubt at all whatsoever that Undertaker was going to win, even more so than usual. It was just that's the way it was going. But at least they got a lot of build-up out of these two. I thought Edge and Undertaker had great chemistry as characters. And Edge had cashed in his Money in the Bank to steal the world title from Undertaker the year before, shortly after Mania 23, so they had a lot to build up with that. Again, I wish they had actually had Edge win at Mania 23 just to do undefeated versus undefeated. I think that would have been a great attraction for the main event. But they didn't do it. They didn't have the foresight, I guess. Which is weird, because you had to know, because Edge did the Money in the Bank cash-in just a few weeks after WrestleMania, at least at the most a month and a half. So they had to be thinking Edge and Taker at 24 by that point, I believe, right? Because Edge kept coming back and costing Undertaker the title, and they kept crossing paths and kept putting off that match and putting off that match and putting off that match. Some of it being put off due to injury, legit injuries by both Taker and Edge. But whatever the case, they got a long time build-up out of it, and they did the payoff in this main event, and I thought the main event was pretty good. I'm not going to sit here and say it was one of my favorites. I thought the ending was a bit silly, because I never liked Hell's Gate as a finisher for The Undertaker, but overall, I did really like the match. I thought it was a pretty strong main event, and it was as much as I think it's a good match for Edge, as it kind of solidified him as a top star. It is another really big Undertaker match at WrestleMania. It was only his second main event where he actually closed out the show, and it was just really well done and great, and just a very good main event. Taker wins the title again, and it would be the last time Undertaker would win the title at WrestleMania. Thank God for that. But then we go on to this 4-year stretch where it's Undertaker versus The Clique, starting with Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25, which really, from a build-up standpoint, had almost no substance to it, where it was basically just, hey, here are two legends that can have a great match. Here you go. The build-up was nowhere near as good as it was in 1997 when these two feuded the first time, and they just had the best storyline ever. That was one of the best one of my personal favorite feuds of all time was Undertaker and Michaels in 1997, and I wasn't overly interested in seeing it again in 2009. I just kind of thought, I wish they'd done something different and something a little bit more creative than this, and they didn't. It was just kind of it's like, let's just do it just to do it, because these two can have a great match at Mania. All of that said, they did have a great match at WrestleMania, so I guess I can't argue with it too much. I thought the match was just very exciting, really well done. Shawn Michaels kicking out of the tombstone was shocking. Was not shocking in the years that followed, because it became a bit of an annual tradition. But moments like that were really, really cool. And it was just a great action-packed match between two legends that could get it done. And that's really all there is to say about it. It was a great match, and a fantastically worked affair. And Undertaker got the win, of course, but then it was used to set up the rematch a year later. Now, this match at WrestleMania 26 had a lot more substance to it, because even though we knew Undertaker was going to win, they put Shawn Michaels' career on the line. And it was like, oh God, something's really at stake here beyond just the streak. It's like, wow, this could be the final time we see Shawn Michaels, and I'm certain he's going to lose, so it's like, oh my God, this could be Shawn's retirement. So that was kind of the emotional backbone of this match, and a really great idea to really raise the stakes for the rematch. And wisely, they were given the main event spot. So Undertaker has his third WrestleMania main event under his belt, because no way anything else on that card was going to top it. It was wisely put as the closing match, and Shawn Michaels' retirement was going to be the huge emotional closer anyway. So it was wise that they did that. Was it as good as the 25 match? I'm going to say no, for reasons that, like I said, Shawn kicking out of the tombstone at 25 was shocking. It wasn't shocking this time because we knew it was coming this time, because it happened in the first match. And there's a lot of other little things like that. It didn't quite have the same surprise factor that the 25 match did with a lot of the things that they did. And it didn't feel like, as a match, that it covered a whole lot of new grounds. But it did work very well as a main event. It was a very good, great match. And Shawn's retirement was a huge emotional impact for the show. And, again, another big win for Undertaker, showing the, list of guys that he's beaten, defeated, retired, or whatever at WrestleMania. It really adds a lot of credibility to the streak when they book him. Okay, not only does he win at WrestleMania, he ends careers. He ended Shawn Michaels' career at WrestleMania. So there's a lot built into this streak, which, again, great booking. And if they ever end the streak, whoever ends the streak is going to get a lot of credibility transferred over to him, because there's a lot of big wins like this one built into that streak. So it's just great booking, if nothing else, and something that they can give a great payoff to down the road. Then we move on to WrestleMania 27 and 28, where he has to work with Triple H again. Like I said, it's Undertaker versus The Clique. He's also beaten every member of Evolution at WrestleMania 2, which that's another interesting little tidbit there as well. Undertaker versus Triple H at WrestleMania 27. Again, not a whole lot of substance to the Mania build-up. It's just kind of, oh, hey, we're two legends, let's have a match. Yeah, they kind of did the thing where Triple H was like, you retired my friend last year, so I want to get revenge for him. But other than that, there wasn't really a whole lot build up to it. They started building the match in February, so it wasn't really that long term either. It was just kind of something that they threw together just to have two legends on the show. But whatever. They went out there and they had this wild brawl. It was a no holds barred match, and it was exciting and it was crazy, and especially towards the end where Undertaker was basically a corpse that got beat down so horribly by Triple H that somehow through some miracle fashion managed to get the win. I mean, it got a little ridiculous with all the things that Undertaker was kicking out of, and it did really go above and beyond what anybody else has ever done as far as trying to establish that Undertaker will never lose at WrestleMania. And this was probably the first match where I thought, okay, Undertaker is going to kick out of anything. I could shoot him in the face and he's still going to kick out. This match really crossed the line and really went into that territory. But, it was still an entertaining match. It was still a really exciting one. I would probably say better than their 17 match, for sure. And I really enjoy it. I think it's really good. Certainly the best match on this WrestleMania, because this WrestleMania was just It was special, let's say that. I'll use that word. It stood out for all the wrong reasons, but this match was at least a really good one. It was kind of them throwing us a bone. It's like, all right, this show's crap, but here's your bone. We'll throw you that match. It's a really good one. So, yeah, I really enjoyed this match, and it's another strong entry into the streak. And then we move into WrestleMania 28, where he faces Triple H again. The 20th match in the streak, which if you'd ever told me that the streak was going to go to 20 matches, if you'd ever told me that any human being alive was going to wrestle at WrestleMania 20 times, I'd have called you a liar. But after taking a year off to sell the beating that he took at the hands of Triple H, Undertaker came back for revenge, and he wanted to avenge the beating. Even though he won at WrestleMania 27, he said that he felt like he lost because he went out on a stretcher. And that's not how Undertaker's supposed to go out at WrestleMania. Or ever. So it was Undertaker versus Triple H again. This time they put him in Hell in a Cell, which was actually perfect because both guys have kind of been built over the years as the kings of Hell in a Cell. Undertaker really helped establish the legacy of Hell in a Cell, while Triple H is one of the most dominant guys inside Hell in a Cell. Actually was undefeated until he faced Batista. That was just kind of how they'd been built. So Hell in a Cell was actually the perfect gimmick to use for them just based on their own legacies. And I thought the match was pretty goddamn good. I thought it was a very dramatic, emotional, crazy match again, with Undertaker kicking out of 80 chair shots and 2 sledgehammer shots and a super kick and a pedigree. They had Shawn Michaels as a special guest referee, which gave them something to play off of. He's like, would he favor his friend and the guy over the guy that beat him at Mania twice and ended his career? So there was that added element there, and I think it added a lot. There are things to nitpick, again, you never really felt like Undertaker was going to lose. It was a foregone conclusion that even when they super kicked him and pedigreed him, it still kind of felt like, yeah, I still think Undertaker's going to kick out. And so there's that problem with it. They didn't really use the Hell in a Cell, which felt weird. The cell itself never really came into play, and it's like they could have just had a normal no-holds-barred match. It would have been exactly the same, which was kind of strange. But other than that, it was a very dramatic, very well done, a very good match. The best match at WrestleMania 28. And I will say this: these last few WrestleManias, Undertaker has been far and away the best match on the show. Regardless of the overall quality of the show, at least you could walk away from it thinking, the Undertaker match was pretty goddamn good. So there's that, and Undertaker won. He went 20-0, and they billed it as the end of an era, although it wasn't really the end of anything because, oh look, WrestleMania 29 is coming up, and both guys are going to be wrestling at WrestleMania. Funny how that works. So it didn't end bullcrap. And Punk is going to be Undertaker's opponent this year. Count on that being 21-0. Punk's going to lose. I'm just letting you know right now. It's a foregone conclusion. If CM Punk wins that match, I will eat my hat and, it's just not going to happen. I'll mark out if it does, but it's not going to. If anybody's going to end the streak at this point, I believe it's going to be John Cena. I think they're going to do that at WrestleMania 30, and Cena might end the streak. And, they'll go wherever they want to go with from there. And if anybody's going to end the streak, I think it's going to be John Cena. That's just my guess. Whether you like it or not, I just think that that's what's going to happen. And I wouldn't be surprised if it does. But for all the highs and lows, the bad matches, the great matches, and, the predictability of Undertaker's matches at WrestleMania most of the time, it is a very interesting legacy at WrestleMania. It is something that's great to observe because the streak has really become one of the major attractions at WrestleMania. And like I said, ending the streak really does mean more than a world championship at this point, so it really does feel like a desirable thing for somebody to have is like, no, I want to be the first one to end the streak. And it's a great direction for a lot of characters, and they've gotten so much out of that creatively, and it's just a wonderful piece of dedication and booking on the WWE's part. And The Undertaker's character is the perfect guy to do this with because he's always been this dominant, mysterious force, and the streak only adds more mystique to the character. And it's just great writing, great booking, and great promotion on Vince McMahon's part to use this very unique, one-of-a-kind character and use it around this great attraction, which is the streak. And it's one of the great statistics in wrestling that people really follow and invest in. And it's really wonderfully done. And it is one of the major attractions of WrestleMania. And I can't praise it enough. It is, whether it's interesting or not, or whether the match is bad or not, it does create a lot of intrigue and a lot of discussion and really does add to the overall legacy of WrestleMania.